I'm Susannah Paletz of the University of Maryland, and I'm presenting Adapting an Emotion Annotation Guide for the US to Poland and Lithuania. This work represents a cross-language, cross-national, cross-cultural approach to developing methods for the study of emotion in social media. So why study social media? First of all, social media as a domain is increasingly an area of cross-national and within national information exchange. Unfortunately, not all this information is true. There's a lot of information out there, including on, for example, COVID-19. But also what happens on social media doesn't stay on social media. It often can cross over into in-person life. A lot of research exists on emotions in social media, but understandably, it's leveraging the fact that social media is big data. So it often is automated methods. Mainly, these are text-based methods. So for instance, in this picture, a text-based method would only be picking up this title here, or this post words, the "Why on earth would Trump pull out of the WTO?" It wouldn't be picking up the image at all and any emotional content there. There's also, when there are emotion detectors, they tend to only be looking at negative or positive sentiment, or maybe there's a small number of emotions, let's say 6. Whereas the psychology of emotions has found there's dozens of emotions and they exist in this multidimensional space where there may be additional emotions in between. Also, a lot of these, not all of them, but a lot of these emotion detectors only pick one emotion for each post. So they ignore emotional complexity, which is this simultaneous expression of multiple emotions at once. Finally, low resource languages are overlooked. So not all of computational linguistics studies every single language. There's some languages that have a lot more research on them than others, and low resource languages don't tend to have emotion category schemes. So what we did was we were doing a larger project looking at emotion in social media. And so we first took the psychology of emotions literature and had version 1 that was preliminary based on the kinds of emotions that were in the literature. And then version 2 was based on our experience with annotating social media. And for this process, we had 2 to 4 coders assess each of 20 emotions separately for the entire post. And each emotion, so be it anger or happiness or love, is being assessed on a 0 for no emotion, not this particular emotion at all, to 100, or the most intense frequent instance of this particular emotion. So amusement, 0, there's no amusement here, to 100, it's just all very intense amusement. And then we would have consensus meetings for when there was a greater than a 20-point difference, or if one of the coders said there was not this emotion, but other coders said there was this emotion. Then we needed to have a conversation and come to a consensus. If it was a smaller than a 20-point difference and everyone agreed there was emotion, then we just averaged. We also judged for both content and for the independent reactions to the content. That's because you could look at a post and have an angry reaction, but there isn't actually anger in that post. And we wanted to make sure that the annotators were keeping this in mind. We didn't do consensus for reactions, just took average and standard deviation because we knew this was more subjective. So in the first and second versions, what we did was we did a number of Twitter posts in English, and we had essentially fairly good reliability. Those dashes there, when it was very rare, it was fewer than 10 cases. And so we weren't really able to calculate a stable reliability. Also, when there is less reliability, when there's fewer cases, it's also harder, not only statistically to calculate, but also it's harder for people to really get trained up and learn how to identify that emotion. So we then wanted to adapt this to the social media space in Eastern Europe, specifically Lithuania and Poland. And in this particular study, which is a larger study, we were looking at sociopolitical and political entities, so politicians, media sources, NGOs, and so on. And we wanted to look particularly at these 2 countries. So to adapt this, there was myself, I'm a monolingual, but I have cross-cultural research and living experience. And then my colleagues who are Polish-American bicultural and Lithuanian, and they're fluent in many languages. And we met for about 20 hours and we went over everything in the code book. Now the code book had not only the words for each, for each emotion, but also a whole paragraph under it, talking about the heuristics that we learned we could use, some of the boundary conditions. So this is how this is love, and this is how this is something else. This is the difference between contempt and hate, for example. And so we had to go through all of this, and we were aiming for construct equivalence. And then my Polish and Lithuanian colleagues then went and translated independently, but then we would have iterative discussions about some specific questions that would come up. And this resulted in changes to all 3 of the code books. So when something wasn't clear, the English code book also changed, became version 3, and potentially one of the other language code books also would change. And in addition, we added admiration, nostalgia, and sexual attraction. We added admiration and sexual attraction because they were coming up in our previous version as a positive other. And so we wanted to include them as their own categories. And nostalgia because, as I mentioned, we were looking specifically at politics. So we thought that could be involved in social media. For this, the annotation process was basically the same. We had 3 or 4 independent coders. Now they were coding in language and culture. So Lithuanian posts are being coded by Lithuanians in Lithuania in the Lithuanian language. Again, the 0 to 100 scale independently for content and subjective reactions, and we'd have the consensus meetings as I described. So some of these emotions were fairly easily adapted. They had similar concepts in English, Polish, and Lithuanian. The translation was easy. They were frequent enough in our data set that people could learn those heuristics and get pretty good. And so then the reliability was good. So this is an example here of one that had love. And it says love is hidden in the simplest gestures. And this is love, and it's got hearts, and it's adorable. It's lovely there. However, there were other things that were much more difficult to adapt. So on the Lithuanian side, empathic pain had no word equivalent. We ended up using a term that's between compassion and condolences. Wonder, the direct translation meant miracle, but in the Lithuanian context, there was very little religious and related imagery. And so we decided to use a "this is unbelievable," which got at the amazement aspect of wonder, not the same as surprise. And of course, that had the in-depth information that I described in terms of the paragraphs. For excitement, the literal translation had sexual connotations, and we already had this other word for that. So instead, we used enthusiasm there. On the Polish side, we also didn't have a word equivalent for empathic pain, but there was a synonym, which was empathy. For wonder, again, it was tricky. There was no word equivalent. Some of the possible translations overlapped with other emotions that we wanted to have distinct. So in this case, we did actually use miracle. And in the Polish context of these politicians, they did use religious imagery quite a bit more. But again, there was the other heuristics and in-depth information. And finally, for embarrassment, the literal translation overlapped with confusion. We decided to use shame. For the psychologists of emotion here, we understand that embarrassment, shame, and guilt are slightly different emotions, but for our coding scheme, we put them all into one category. So it wasn't a problem to have shame here as well. So here's some examples. So in terms of wonder, this was things that were found in Polish. These 3 are sort of more typically what our first version of the code book would have found. It's amazing landscapes, beautiful natural views. We also had, of course, extended the code because of the adaptation process to include miracles and religious references. This picture here, the wonder is not in this picture. The wonder in this one is actually with the words, the miracle that they're describing. And then in all the cases, of course, wonder can be related to art and amazing art. So made sure that it was captured here as well in this particular case. So on the Lithuanian side, I wanted to give a couple examples here of excitement, and some of the heuristics we used were exclamation points and all caps to indicate excitement. And in these cases, there's definitely words that indicate excitement and enthusiasm, and in this one as well, which is trying to get people to go to a conference. And so neither of these are extremely high, but they're definitely both present. Here's another Polish example of empathic pain. In this one, it's talking about it's difficult to follow the recommendation of stay home when you're homeless. And empathic pain, of course, is this pain you feel because of the suffering of others. Now, in addition to getting a 30, which is not very high, but it's moderate, We also had for this post additional emotions of sadness and admiration. And the admiration was because of this part in the bottom, the medics on the street, talking about the people helping. And in this case, the concept didn't really change, but the adaptation encompassed a synonym term. Now, another emotion I want to mention is kamamuta. And this concept exists in English, Polish, and Lithuanian, but the actual direct translation doesn't exist in any of these languages. And we wanted to include this because this emotion is the emotion you feel when you engage with something that's cute. And it's this positive, heartwarming emotion. It's not the same as love. We empirically wanted to test how correlated it was with love. And also because, of course, we're studying social media, we thought there's a lot of cute things on social media. We have to study this emotion. And some of the things that were indicative of cuteness and indicative of kavamuta that we put in our paragraph had to do with juvenile characteristics. So it looks like a baby, personality characteristics, some kinds of behavior like playfulness, clumsiness, cute interactions between cute things. Cuteness by contrast is when you have two things that look similar, but one is big and one is small. Oh, so cute. Cute words. And of course, people saying things like, this is so cute. So here's an example. This is a still from a video from the original Twitter that we were coding where a handler of pandas is cleaning pandas, but they're trying to play with him and cuddle him at the same time. It was very cute, very heartwarming. So another thing I want to mention is it was not possible to do this annotation without having people do it in language and in cultural context. And this is an example where it says, thank you, Ambassador Georgette Mossbacher. And this is an ambassador who is allegedly physically resembling Peggy Bundy, who's an American character on a TV show. And there's all this emotional complexity where there's all these different kinds of emotions going on through this very short words and this image. And this is something we just couldn't have understood if it went through a Google Translate and if it wasn't the people who really understood the culture and the context doing the coding. So in terms of reliability, it was harder to achieve strong reliability if an emotion was rare. And this is because, of course, it's harder to train and then harder statistically to even find that. And so we had these lines for when it was just too rare to calculate. But for those most difficult to adapt, a lot of them actually ended up with decent reliability. So empathic pain is good. Excitements could be better. It's okay. And then for wonder, Polish had enough that we were able to calculate reliability, and it was overall very strong. And so in a lot of the other emotions, it was pretty strong. So we feel like we did do a decent job with doing the reliability and with doing the adaptation, with the only caveat being that some things are just very rare in this corpus. And so we'd want to dig into them more. We were surprised nostalgia was rare, for instance. So in conclusion, we think that cross-cultural psychology methods are very well suited for adapting these kinds of complex psychological annotation schemes to different countries, languages, whether it's Japan to the US or the US to Lithuania and Poland. And we also think that increasingly this needs to be the approach for social computational data science, which is where you're studying social media, and particularly for low resource languages and cultures. We did find the equivalence issues to be challenging, but we do think that this highlights a weakness of the automated methods. And for current and future work, we're applying this to Spanish, and we're creating a new version of the codebook, which includes curiosity, hope, boredom, and fatigue. So thank you to my authors, my co-authors, and thanks very much, of course, to our research assistants in Lithuania and Poland, and thanks to the US government that funded this. And also thank you to the audience for listening to this talk. And if you have any comments or questions, I believe there'll be a discussion board and we can discuss over that. So thank you very much.